Great, welcome guests. I'm sorry I had to put you into the the waiting room for a bit there. We are planning to start the session at 5 o'clock, and it's lovely to see you very eager coming to the session, mashallah. We have a wonderful session this evening with Sister Abeda, as you can see in front of you. We are waiting for a few more people to join us, inshallah, so we can start promptly at 5. We're also on Facebook, so we are waiting for people on Facebook also to join, inshallah. Some messages are coming up on Facebook. That is really nice, mashallah, to see people are joining in. Thank you for coming. We do request that you keep your cameras and your mics on mute, and then anything that you'd like to correspond to us, if you want to type a message in the message box below, inshallah. It's a real privilege to be here with you this evening and doing this live session. It's our first time, and if you're watching me live on Facebook at 3 o'clock, doesn't seem that long ago, I was just explaining how nervous I was doing this first session, but I want to thank all the team who, mashallah, without them we wouldn't be here and able to put on this. And I also want to extend that to my daughter who is here with me, that I'm going to hand reach any time to help me if we come to any problems. Mashallah, we need to invest in our youth, because our youth are the future, and they, while we have taught them and raised them, mashallah, they are raising us now and teaching us things that we never knew before. So this is quite a new evening for us this evening. As Sister Abeda is there in front of me, she's smiling at me as I say that, because I'm sure you feel the same, Sister Abeda, that your children also teach you a lot.
Definitely, Kathleen. Jazakallah khair. I definitely feel that without our children, like you said, they're being mentors for us, really. So it's almost reverse learning. We're learning from them, alhamdulillah, and it's a wonderful learning experience, mashallah.
Mashallah, it is wonderful for all of us, indeed, that where would we be? And indeed, our anxiety levels would be way up there. We would be talking to each other about what we can do to bring down our anxiety levels if we didn't have our children, our family, our team, our people that have been there, being patient with us, reading those little pop-ups that come up when we're trying to set up this. No, you must do that. And I'm so grateful to everybody that has had the patience with me. I'm glad it's Ramadan. They're probably more patient with me, because they have explained things and re-explained things and never said it with a frown in their face, but always with a smiling face. Oh, Kathleen, you need to do this, or look at this again. So it's been wonderful indeed learning from everybody, mashallah.
MashaAllah, alhamdulillah. May Allah bless everybody and give everybody ajr for all the good deeds they've accumulated, mashallah.
MashaAllah, yes, indeed, mashallah. It's really good to be here, mashallah. Alhamdulillah, we've a lot to be grateful for, that we are alive, we're healthy, we're well, alhamdulillah, we're at home in Ramadan, which in itself is another blessing, that we're actually, yeah. How is your Ramadan going for us, Abeda? Tell us a little bit about your day. What's your day look like?
Alhamdulillah, like you said, I just feel it's a big blessing that normally if you think about typical Ramadan, we'll be still out and about, kind of rushing from work, getting indoors, and kind of then thinking about the food preparation and fitting in our ibadah around that. I think this Ramadan is definitely a unique experience, because although we're still working, but I think that the less traveling means that we have more time at our disposal, which I feel is a big blessing. So today's been a lovely day, alhamdulillah, kind of doing a bit of this and then being around the family. And the weather is very nice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been so merciful with the lovely shiny weather outdoors. So that's an extra blessing, mashallah.
MashaAllah, definitely, mashallah. And you know, for me, I don't know about you, maybe you go walking a lot, but this year, because I haven't had to go to work and come home from work and get stuck in traffic, I'm actually able to do some walking in the evening time. So it's the first time ever in Ramadan, I must say, my first time to actually be able to go out walking. And I always had this perception that, you know, any exercise, walking, you feel so thirsty after. But actually, no, alhamdulillah, we're still able to go walking and still able to continue.
That's true, definitely, mashallah.
Have you done anything new in Ramadan? Have you tested anything or tried anything new?
Well, I think the good thing just before just before Ramadan, just after lockdown, like a lot of people in my neighborhood, I've noticed that a lot more people are walking, and walking has become a routine for us. So Alhamdulillah, which is a really nice thing. So and I've just realized it was quite an easy habit to have, and I'm wondering why do I kind of go in and come out of it? But Alhamdulillah, that ability to just fit that daily walk into our lives has been a big blessing.
Yeah.
And I think it's a gift from the lockdown. One of the gifts, one of the many gifts that inshallah some of them will kind of talk about in our discussion today, that there's so many good things, alhamdulillah, that have also come out of this situation, and we hopefully can focus on some of the good things, inshallah.
Inshallah, yes, definitely, mashallah. There's been so much, I think, even smiles. I know when I go walking in my area, a lot of people were just so busy and passing by, but now everybody stops and says hello, even though they might be saying it from the other side of the road because they have to cross the road to keep that distance. But they're smiling, which is wonderful, mashallah. And I'm getting to talk to neighbors that I probably wouldn't have seen on a regular basis before.
That is so true. And I think the fact that it just seems, and I think people will agree that in Ramadan especially, we feel that there's more barakah in our time. And it seems like time has slowed down a little bit for everyone because of the way the routines have changed. And we can connect with people better, whether it's with our body language, with eye contact, like you said, with our smiles. So again, that's a big blessing. And we draw so much positivity from that. I mean, I've just noticed when you started smiling and your attention it just perked me up a little bit. And that's just magical, isn't it? And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, it's sadaqah. It doesn't cost us a lot, but the benefits we yield from smiling are just phenomenal. So thank you for smiling, Kathleen.
Oh, you're welcome indeed. And inshallah, maybe we both get rewarded for this, because I've done some reflection on smiling and thinking about it and knowing the chemistry in the brain, and when we smile, the endorphins are released. So it's our own endorphins. And when we smile at somebody else, they can't but smile back, as you mentioned. So what you're doing is you're helping their endorphins be released. So we're subhanAllah, talking about charity is the best way of giving charity, to change the whole frame of how people is feeling by just smiling.
Amazing, amazing, subhanallah.
SubhanAllah, it's amazing how our bodies are built, and we don't even have to go, oh, come on, hormones do this, or come on, lungs breathe for us, or come on, heart pump for us. SubhanAllah, everything is ticking away normally.
Definitely. And I wonder, in terms of our daily lives when we are with our children as parents, especially as mums, because we're often so busy, I think we forget to smile a lot of times. We do.
Don't we? Yes,
yeah,
we
yeah, definitely.
we forget about what it is like really to be that parent. We're so busy going around, we forget what a human being, and smile and be great. And you know, our children, they're so funny. You know, if you look at the younger little ones, age 2, 3, and 4, and what they do, right up even our teenagers, and how they interact with us and how they talk to us, that we should be smiling more. We should be kind of severing the moment and thinking about that moment and how good it is that we have them there with us, and how much of a pleasure it is to be there in the whole family, rather than rushing around and thinking of the next thing. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners this evening, although they're coming on and we'll be starting soon, are thinking about what they're going to cook for iftar. So, okay, I'm here now. I wonder, can I listen to this and cook at the same time? So I'm sure there's a few people multitasking as they're joining us this evening and thinking about that.
Definitely. And I think that's in a way, that's a super quality that a lot of us women, especially, I mean, I'm not saying men cannot multitask, but when it comes to cooking and kind of looking after the children, I think us women, alhamdulillah, we are more flexible, and we can put many hats on and switch many hats on very quickly. So that's a big blessing. So a big pat on our backs for doing that.
It is indeed a big pat on our backs, indeed, alhamdulillah. We should be patting ourselves on our backs, indeed, and be grateful for what we can do and how we can multitask, indeed. And if you see this evening about multitasking, trying to put this together, there's been a lot of multitasking going on, but alhamdulillah, it's all come together, indeed. I'm coming up to just about 5 o'clock now. So we're going to be starting very, very soon, indeed. I'm just trying to get the right time. Yes, it's 5. So inshallah, will we make a start, do you think? Or do you think everybody has logged in? Or should we wait another couple of minutes for people? Excuse me.
I suppose we can give them a few more minutes if you like, and then make a start.
If they haven't had the link and things like that. Yeah. So we'll just remind people that are on the group. Maybe I'll just resend the link as I'm talking here again to people that are on the group, because we have had a lot of people on, oh, what am I doing? We've had a lot of people that have showed interest, and we have over 100 people on the group. That's why we had to actually go on Facebook Live as well to allow people to join, because if everybody wanted to join, they wouldn't be able to join in.
Inshallah.
Okay, so I've just sent a message again to everybody that they can join in now, and by clicking on the link. So I just say, please click on the link to join. It is very easy, actually, way of joining in now, inshallah. That you just click on the Zoom link, and then you're here with everybody else.
It's interesting that you had a waiting room for people, and I was just kind of thinking the reality of this visual working and everything. It just sounds like it's just amazing, isn't it? And maybe it's just that, but I find that whole thing quite fascinating and incredible. MashaAllah.
MashaAllah, it is indeed kind of a lot, and there's a lot of learning to do around this, indeed, and we've only just getting used to it, or I'm only just getting used to it, but inshallah. So I think we will make a start, inshallah, because I think everybody has come in now or have joined already. So we'd just like to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this evening's session, inshallah, with Sister Abeda about anxiety. Sister Abeda is a counselor, a specialist also in relationship counseling, mashallah, and has been a counselor for many years. She's also one of our senior trainers in approachable parenting and has been delivering parenting programs with us also for many, many years, mashallah. And it's a privilege to have her on our team, mashallah, with us. We also, well, I suppose before I go further, I should introduce myself. My name is Kathleen Wojnagi. I'm Managing Director of Approachable Parenting. And Approachable Parenting is an organization that's non-for-profit, and we work with BME communities mainly, in particular the Muslim community. We deliver evidence-based parenting programs from pregnancy right up to parents of teenagers. So we've got pregnancy and beyond, pregnancy to 3, 4 to 11, and teenage program. And we also do relationship coaching, and we train trainers to deliver our programs, such as Sister Abeda. All our trainers, and we've over 40 trainers now up and down the country, have a teaching qualification to be able to deliver our programs. We do also train parents to be sparklers. They peer mentor other parents. So we love our sparklers. They're wonderful. They give up their time and volunteer with us to help others, mashallah, which is wonderful to have them. And we're so pleased to have them. And this evening we're approached by BEP, which is Birmingham Educational Partnership. And they've asked us to put on this show on anxiety and another 5 after this. So we have 6 sessions in total over 7 weeks. So we're not doing half term because it's the week of Eid as well. And we know even in lockdown, you'll probably be busy and want to do other things rather than listen to a show. But at that week also, we want to relook at what we've done and reassess what we've done and plan the next 3 according to what you want. So in the next few weeks, please do message us, interact with us either in our chats or email info@approachableparenting.org.uk and let us know what it is that you would like to have in the shows, and we can see how we can accommodate you, inshallah, in the last 3 sessions. I'm sure a lot will come out of these sessions anyway, and that you will be able to link with us, and we'll be able to think about then how we can approach that and address your needs, inshallah. We also like to mention that we're in partnership doing these programs with Norton Hall, which are based in East Birmingham, and a lot of our listeners and viewers today will know them. And also Muslim Youth Helpline are involved. So it's great to have that partnership there, where Norton Hall is working with a lot of children at the moment from age 4 upwards. And Muslim Youth Helpline, as you know, deal with teenagers and have a free helpline there for anybody that would like to phone in. Please do call, it is free, and teenagers do call them regularly. Actually, they have had such an increase in their calls over lockdown. It's unbelievable. We know that people need help. Parents need help, teenagers need help, and parents of young people need help. So we're here to try and help you with this. We also like to remind you, and I'll remind you again at the end, that please give us your postcode. Now, we don't need your whole postcode. We just need the first part of your postcode. We're just trying to make, trying to find out really where you are from. So if, for example, you're from B8 or B12, if you can just tell us that first part so we can go back to Birmingham Education Partnership and say, okay, we've had so many viewers and they've been from this side of town, so that we know where they are from. Or if you're from outside Birmingham, do let us know also. So it's just to have a gauge to feed back to our funders, along with your comments, because again, we need to feed that back to our funders. Has this been successful or not successful for you? So we have 3 sessions. Today, we're talking about anxiety. Next week, we're talking about resilience with Sister Maria, who is a psychotherapist, and that is on the 14th at 5 p.m. And then the following week, we have Happy Families with Brother Saeed, who is also a counsellor. And all of our counsellors, our trainers, are approachable parenting trainers. And the last one, Brother Saeed, will be on the 21st of May at 5 p.m. So those are 3 sessions that we've got planned at the moment. We would ask you, please, for this session to keep your microphones off, to keep your cameras off, so that we can interact and go through the session. But please do, we do have somebody monitoring your chats, so please do put in any questions, and we will collate and theme those questions. So if your question is a little bit different than what you've written, it's because we are trying to collate and theme questions to ask Sister Abeda, so we get through as many questions as possible, so we're able to answer all these questions that come in. If we run out of time, we will answer them later on and post them up. As well as posting up this video that you'll be able to view later on, and it'll be the video also on Facebook, we are doing a tip sheet that will go alongside this to be able to give you the tips that came out of the session also, inshallah. So lots there for us to do, lots there to think about us, and a lot more people have joined us, which is great. So I'm going to pass over to Sister Abeda now to start the session. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Abeda.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair, Kathleen. It's a big privilege. It's always a privilege to be here in your company and to connect with some of the parents, alhamdulillah. And I'm hoping that the people who would join us, many of them would be parents that at some point have come and attended our fantastic courses. So we start off with a dua where we say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my Lord, I'm in absolute need of the good you will send me. So Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khairin fakir. And we also make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us spouse and offsprings who are going to be the comfort of our eyes, inshallah ta'ala. So we remind ourselves by narrating a hadith of Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ said, nothing afflicts a Muslim of hardship or illness or anxiety, nor sorrow, nor harm, or nor distress, not even the pricking of the thorn, but that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expiates his sin by it. So alhamdulillah, that's a beautiful reminder. And that's a reminder that grounds us if we're feeling anxious, if we're worried, if we're stressed. So that's a strong reminder that tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his mercy is always completely surrounding us. So even if we feel stressed, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking after us, alhamdulillah. And that's a big blessing. So I do know that all of us are really stressed out. And obviously on the spectrum, some people are more stressed out and worried, some people are less anxious. But the reality is that this current situation affects everybody. And like I said, the degree might change. We know that the fact that our children are not in school means that suddenly parents are really worried because they A, worry about their performance, and B, they worry, mothers are especially worried that, you know, they're not really teachers, so they're really concerned as to if children being away means that it's impacting their academic ability and their learning opportunities. And then furthermore, obviously it's problematic for people who have underlying mental health issues or emotional health issues. So this is definitely a difficult time for all of us. Now, if we kind of focus on anxiety now, when we talk about anxiety, we do use anxiety as a loose term, but and like I said, it's a spectrum. So people can be anxious. So I was a bit anxious before I started, Kathleen. That's just before we came on. But alhamdulillah, your smile grounded me and it allowed me to feel calmer. But for some people, sometimes anxiety is unmanageable. So, like I said, if it's just a bit of worry and a bit of fear, then that's quite normal, and it definitely eventually settles. But persistent anxiety or persistent heightened fear and negativity can lead to not just mental health issues, but obviously there are huge physical problems associated with that. So some of the common symptoms that we might notice, not just in ourselves, but in our children, it could be that, you know, we feel that our heart is palpitating more, or feel a bit shaky, a bit nervous, sometimes shortness of breath. And all this, obviously, if it's perpetually there, then we do know that it would definitely hinder our everyday functionality, and it becomes problematic. But I guess the most important thing for us parents is to remind ourselves that if we as parents are anxious, then that anxiety is going to spill over to our children. So like they say that if anxious parents will raise anxious children, and it's important to recognize that the more calm and collected and gathered and grounded as parents we are, our children will mirror that. So that's very important. So I guess in today's session, what we're going to do is, like we do in most of our parenting courses at Approachable Parenting, is that because we don't work with the children when we set these, when you come to these parenting programs, we're working with you as parents. And a lot of parents, the feedback we get is that they recognize that they try and weed out the issues that they have in our personalities. So this is going to be an opportunity for us to look at what are the things that we need to do and incorporate in everyday life, so that we can deal with anxiety and manage our anxiety and our children's anxiety in a healthy way, inshallah. So I guess the first thing to do is to start with gratitude and acceptance. And what I mean by that is gratitude for the fact that, alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed us with children, and Allah has given us this privilege and this huge blessing. He's given us these children as a amana. So that in itself is a big blessing. And we also accept the fact that none of us are perfect. We make mistakes every day, and we seek tawbah, we learn from them, and we're just normal people. So I suppose a pressure that we all feel in this day and age is that because we see people pretending to be perfect parents, for instance, because of Snapchat, Facebook, all these things. And I think that accumulates a lot of pressure on us. So this next hour or so, I'm hoping that we can just put all that pressure aside and just accept our flaws and just try and learn from what we can, inshallah. So if we think about anxiety in younger children, we need to understand that it affects children in many different ways. So very young children, so we're looking at children like toddlers and then young children under the age of 10, for instance, their anxiety can sometimes show up in them having sleep disturbance, for instance, or they feel very fidgety and irritated all the time. Or obviously, if they're not sleeping at school, then they might sleep during the day. They might have difficulty concentrating, and they usually they're more irritated. And then with younger children, like I said, they can be more prone to crying excessively or having more tantrums and irritability. When we look at anxiety in teenagers, what we see is that one of the biggest things with teenagers is that as we know that because their brains are changing, so their behavior changes a lot anyway. So that bubbly child, you know, the one that used to be when they were 6 or 8 or 10, they used to come and just sit on your lap and they were okay with showing affection and receiving affection. Suddenly when they change into teenagers, they just morph into different people. So they tend to stay in their rooms more, and they're not. They create this transparent barrier between them and the caregiver, so between them and the parents. So because a lot is changing, and Kathleen, again in our teens program, we talk about the change in the teenager's brain a lot. So it's important to recognize that for being a teenager is hard work for our teenagers. So it's not so easy. So so for them, obviously, they would feel, because of this whole situation that they're in, suddenly, for instance, children who are working really hard towards their GCSEs or A levels, or coming towards the exam season, suddenly this whole uncertainty has taken everything away from them. So they will feel quite restless, they will feel nervous, and they would feel quite worried. Now the thing is that teenagers will express their anxiety very differently to young children, and obviously very differently to how we adults would express our anxiety. So some of the teenagers might express their anxiety by being very drawn, and sometimes overly emotional. So you might see two extreme emotions. So they might feel very lethargic and not interested, and then on the other extreme they might show a lot of exaggerated emotion, and you might think, nothing happened, and this huge kind of outburst of a lot of emotion and a lot of drama in the home environment. So it's important to recognize that whatever we're seeing on the surface is just the tip of the iceberg. So if they're showing a lot of negative emotion, we have to understand that underneath that is a lot of uncertain and kind of unexplored emotions. So it's really important for us as parents to not get sucked into that tip of the iceberg, that negative emotion at the top, because otherwise that home environment is going to be very charged and very intense and very negative. So some of the other symptoms might be that children might feel that they might have headaches, unexplained headaches or stomach aches, or especially backache and fatigue. Now, like I said, us as parents, what we have to do is moderate our response. Many of us as parents, especially moms, would recognize that we don't realize, and before we know, a thing will spiral into a big thing, and you think, oh my God, it started off by me just saying to him or her that you haven't really made your bed in a week or whatever, and it has turned into World War III in my household. What's going on? So I think the important thing is that we as parents, we have to ground ourselves. and have tawakkul, and our response has definitely always have to be moderated. So we're not going to get in there quick to fix things and be very reactive. So when we are very reactive, we go into that fight or flight response, which means that nobody is in control of that situation. The child is in a heightened state of being reactive, and so is the parent. So it's like, you know, rather than an adult and a child, it becomes like two children. And often mothers would say to me that, you know, I feel totally disempowered, and I feel like A, I have no authority, B, I have no respect, and it's just it's a very disempowering position for unfortunately for some parents to be in. So it's important that we make sure that our response is moderated, and we can only have a moderated response when we're not triggered by what we're seeing in the child, but we all are always kind of thinking about what is underneath that behavior and where is that behavior coming from. So stepping away from the situation, like the Prophet ﷺ told us, that we don't react, we respond. And inshallah, in a minute, we'll look at what's the best way of how do we learn to respond, inshallah. So we'll look at that. Now, oftentimes what does happen when our children are testing us, when they're being disrespectful, for instance, you know, we make dua that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide our children, all of our children. But the reality is that when they're being distant, when they're being disrespectful, or when they're being grumpy or grouchy, or when they're being disconnected with us, the way we respond to that as parents is that we do something which we call cognitive dissonance, which is that our way of thinking becomes quite unhelpful and unhealthy, in that sense that we might start filtering our thoughts through in a way that we will just look at one situation, focus on that one negative thing, and discount everything else. So if the child has not listened to something that I wanted them to do, so a mental filter might be, you know, astaghfirullah, everything is problematic, my life is miserable, my you know, we focus on the extreme negative kind of the picture. The second thing could be, and this applies both to us as parents and to our children, that we are prone to jump to conclusions. For instance, things like in our heads, we might have a dialogue that just because you're not listening to me, he's going to, God forbid, end up in having drugs, or God forbid, become a part of a big gang, or you know, be like his uncle so and so, or whatever. So as Islamically, we say that these are all waswasas from the shaitan. But in psychology, obviously, we talk about how our dissonance in cognition takes over, and we become quite vulnerable. So it's important to check that we're doing of this, and we need to come away from that. So another thing that I know that as parents we tend to do a lot is that we catastrophize the situation, and then we do a lot of labeling as well. So when we label our children, or when we label ourselves, like if I label myself and say that I'm a really inadequate parent, and I'm really rubbish at what I do as a parent. So can you imagine what that's going to do to my confidence, and how would that impact my ability to manage a difficult situation, so manage conflict between two children, because my inner resource is not there. So I'm going to feel like a failure. So I've given up even before I've tried. And the reality is that when we label ourselves, our children can sense that. And similarly, when we label our children can sense that as well, even if we're not saying it out often enough. So the cognitive dissonance is a big issue with anxiety, and especially when we try to help somebody who has anxiety, we definitely work quite closely, even to the extent that in cognitive behavior therapy, for instance, we will suggest that people write their thinking. So, you know, in a given situation, what was the thought, then how did that make you feel, what was the physical symptoms, and then what was the behavior. So I think it's important for us parents especially to kind of check ourselves constantly, get into the habit of kind of connecting with our thoughts and thinking, okay, how am I thinking right now about this situation? And the minute we start thinking, the benefit of that is that we then cannot be overly reactive. So we come out of that state of fight and flight. And that 1 or 2 minutes of reflection before we respond, alhamdulillah, that is so powerful. And once we get into that habit, I strongly believe that it changes the home dynamic completely, and it definitely does. So one of the effective grounding techniques kind of out of this whole thing about making sure that we're not in a constantly fight or flight mode. So we allow ourselves to peg and ground. And a popular one of these is that we teach ourselves and we teach our children to do this. So I would really encourage everybody who's here with us today to use this and get into the habit of doing this, not just for ourselves when we're feeling a bit out of our depth or feeling a bit anxious, but definitely encourage our young children to use this as a tool. So this is one of those invisible tools that children can use before exam, before before an interview or anything where they feel that they're feeling anxious. So obviously we teach our du'as. One of a very popular du'a that most parents learn and teach our children is Musa alayhi salam's dua, where Musa alayhi salam asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unknot the knot in our lungs and expand our chest. But coming back to this exercise is that we have to identify when we're feeling anxious, we breathe and we identify 5 things that we can see. So we just scan around the room and just name 5 things that you can see. Then you 4 things that you can feel. So touching your clothes or any other textural things around you. 3 things that you can hear. 2 things you can smell. So for instance, I've got my lovely candle here. So if I smell that, it smells, mashallah, really lovely. And then 1 thing that you can taste. Now the benefit for this is that it really grounds us. So it takes the focus away from me catastrophizing something, visualizing in my head something really terrible that might happen to me far in the future, or kind of thinking about what happened last week or last night or whatever. It grounds me and it pegs me firmly on the ground. And that feeling of coming back to this room right now means that, I'm not going to be anxious anymore and I'm going to be able to breathe better. So that's a really effective way. Now, in terms of kind of thinking about simple tips, like I said, that we all start with making dua. And the thing with dua is that I think often we forget the power of dua. And dua as a tool, especially when we feel that our children are testing us, is amazing, because the minute we take the focus away from the child's behavior and we reconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a huge resource. And again, it allows us to focus that even if I feel that I'm ill-equipped or I've made mistakes or I'm not doing it the way I should be doing it, or my child doesn't understand, we give it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He is Hayyul Qayyum. He doesn't blink. He's the one who can do anything. So just connecting with Allah, especially when we feel that we're tested by our children. And the reality is that it's an everyday thing. It's really the way our children are with us. Even if we feel that it is catastrophic, the reality is that oftentimes it's not as bad. So one of the recommendations that we have, and this is not just for this COVID-19 thing, actually, this is a long-term thing, is that we need to have a regular routine, not just for our children, but obviously for ourselves. And this is basically, having a good routine is good for mental health anyway. And like I said, again, connecting with, understanding our emotions and replacing our negative emotions with positive ones. So when we do that, immediately it allows us to feel a bit positive and relax. Another thing that, especially for parents and especially for mums, is that when we feel that we're really busy, so the first thing that goes on our list to do is our kind of self-care. So if I have things to do, by default, I might want to put my kind of little thing, my half an hour or my hobby or whatever is important for me will be the last one on that list. And we feel that that's a default thing. And some of us are being, unfortunately, conditioned in a way that we feel that self-care is selfishness. But the reality is that self-care is extremely important. And we might expand on that a little bit more as to how we can do that, especially in these days. But I think it's extremely important, because if we are tired and exhausted, and no, if we don't feel positive, then definitely we won't have much to give to those around us. So as caregivers, as parents, as mothers, I think it's extremely important. The next thing is, which people understand that, but I think people forget to make the link between how anxious we feel and the food that we eat. So obviously we know that good nutrition is very important, and obviously for us Muslims, it goes without saying that halal food is very important. But people often forget to focus on tayyib, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about halal food, he also mentions tayyib food. So when we think about tayyib food, the focus is on making sure that we're not feeding ourselves and our children a lot of junk food, a lot of food that has preservatives and extra food coloring and all that kind of processed sugary stuff. Because we now know that there is a huge link between our mental health and the food that we consume, and especially anxiety. So things that are loaded with sugar and stuff will make our children more anxious. Now, focusing on the fact that Prophet ﷺ said cleanliness is half of the faith. And I want to insist on that, especially on times when we are on holidays, and especially during this lockdown thing, because we're not really leaving our homes. There is a tendency that we feel that we can just be in our pajamas all day, because we're not going anywhere out. So, and as women especially, you know, it's a running joke, isn't it, that women dress up for when they especially go out. So we just feel that it's okay, you know, we can just stay in our pajamas. But we have to understand that, and that this is important, inshallah, to implement ourselves, and then try and encourage our children that the minute we come out of our pajamas, when we wear something more presentable and decent to be around the household, it really, that transition from how we're feeling when we are in our night clothes to wearing something that's fresh and crispy and nice, it mentally does wonders, really. So we also now know that medicinally there is huge benefits with just cold splashes of water, for instance. So getting into the habit of having a morning shower is extremely important for mental health, and especially to contain our negative emotions and to calm us down. So I think that's very, very important. In terms of how we interact with other people, I think this whole thing with social distancing, obviously, as we all know, that we're guided by whatever the government is telling us and whatever advice we get through NHS. So we have to, there's no question, we have to abide by that. And for us Muslims, I suppose, when especially looking at Ramadan, it becomes quite problematic, because we always associate Ramadan with a communal spirit. So just because we can't go out to see family as much or go to the masajids, I think that spirit of Ramadan, in terms of calming the home environment, is important, that we still encourage our children to participate in terms of giving if iftar food to our neighbors or whatever, and kind of keeping that community spirit going. So another thing, which when it comes to making the home environment positive, in the sense to calm down our negative emotions, is kind of improving our relationship with our children. So like I said, when we have those anxieties that we worry about our children's academic performance, like a lot of mothers are really worried that, you know, they'll miss on their SATs or their GCSEs or whatever grades they were hoping to, they won't exceed as much. I think we have to be realistic and put some of that worry on the back burner, and focus on building our relationship with our children in this time. So a simple activity, like, you know, when we do have time, just taking out their baby albums and just looking at their photos. Because don't forget, especially with teenagers, when relationships are quite confrontational and difficult, our children sometimes forget that, you know, these were our babies a few years ago, where you were cuddling them and holding them and feeding them and changing them and bathing them. So sometimes looking at baby albums is such a powerful therapeutic tool to use to bring that connection back. So maybe investing in one evening where you can just do that with your children, and I feel that can be a really good tool. And alhamdulillah, like we've just said in the beginning, that, you know, we're using Zoom as a new platform. I think a lot of families are now using social media and technology to connect with families, and especially teaching our children that, you know, when they're feeling stressed, sometimes that connection with other people, even if it's with their friends, which is very important, we have to accept that their connection with their friends is important. And even if we don't see that, we have to understand that we cannot expect our children not to connect with their friends. So I think the whole social connection is very, very important. One of the things that we kind of talk about a lot in our parenting programs is the concept that we obviously we do a lot of things for our children. Physically, parents are really invested in you know, providing and fulfilling their physical needs. So, you know, whatever we do for our children, education and buying things for them and all that. But I guess the important thing for us, especially for these days, is kind of connecting with them. So what we call ABC, which is attachment, bonding, and connection. So as mothers and fathers, it's kind of making this as a priority for these days, is that everything else can wait. You know, their education and everything else can be put on hold for a few months, because these times are unique or whatever. But this is a time that we revisit our ABC, go back to the basics, and kind of really focus on our attachment and bonding and a connection with our children. It's also important to make sure that we, as parents, we get into a good habit of making use of our outdoor space, because whatever that is, it could be a small patch in the garden, it could be just going out to in the front yard or on the road to just connect with nature. Because we know that when we are surrounded by nature, we know that all the trees and all the clouds and all the birds and the bees, they are all constantly in the state of zikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we surround ourselves with nature, it has a calming effect on us anyway. And each one of us knows that. So we have to do that ourselves, and then encourage our children to do that. So again, as a family, finding a good time, even in Ramadan, I'm sure we can find half an hour where we can think about going outdoor just for a quick walk as a family. And even if some children join, some children don't join, it doesn't really matter. So our teenagers might not want to do that. That's fine. And we accept that. Maybe they don't want to do that. But as a family, as parents, whatever becomes the norm, whatever we practice, inshallah, you know, the children will internalize that. And like we say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So even at this point, if you feel, well, you know, I do this, but my child doesn't do this, it doesn't really matter. They will gradually come around, inshallah, because whatever is familiar and is accessible in their environment, they eventually do gravitate towards that. Now, especially in Ramadan, obviously we do see that Ramadan is for each one of us, it's an opportunity for everyone to have that introspection, a kind of think, how am I going to make myself better? So rather than focus, especially when we think about parenting, and when we think about feeling overwhelmed and anxious, what we tend to do is it becomes not about me, it becomes about what other people are doing to me. So oftentimes it's, if only my husband was more supportive and more hands-on in the kitchen, or more hands-on with the children's homework, I will feel much better. or only if my children had more adab, or if they were more, more organized, or they were just nicer to each other and not fight, I will feel much more better. But I think this is an opportunity to focus on ourselves more. So our manners, our language, our behavior, how are we speaking? So it's kind of making sure that we mirroring good behavior, we're showing good behavior so others can mirror us. So mirroring is very, very important. So going back to the previous point, that if we are going to be anxious, then definitely if we're going to use language which is anxiety provoking, and if we're going to use negative language and negative body language, then obviously our children learn from us as we are their role models. So I think that's very important. It's also very important to engage our children in our household task. And I know that a lot of mums might be just rolling their eyes and saying, well, Sister Abeda, what are you saying? That's just stating the obvious, isn't it? And alhamdulillah, we try, and some days it works, some days it doesn't work. But I think the key thing is that we don't give up on any of those things. So just because it hasn't worked today, or it hasn't worked yesterday, does not mean that it's not going to work tomorrow. So we don't give up. We stay persistent, and we try and engage our children. So whether it's baking, whether it's kind of with the teenagers, it's making sure that we're making things that they enjoy, and that's the thing in terms of building that rapport, that we engage them in little things around the house. So and for that, I suppose just having a simple routine and being realistic in what we can expect. Another big thing that we know helps is that when we look at our surroundings, when we especially a term that's been thrown out a lot is that we all feel quite zoomed out, that there's so much advice coming from the different platforms, and obviously this is again another one of those. But I suppose it's important to be a bit picky and see what we really want to receive, and don't be excessive, because sometimes that overload and overstimulation is also not good for anxiety, obviously. And another thing which is very important is that we constantly have some space throughout the day where we kind of connect with gratitude. So it's so easy, going back to the cognitive dissonance, it's so easy to focus on the negatives, even when it's with our children who we feel are testing us, and they're being rude, or they're being disgruntled, and they're not listening to us. There are so many blessings around us that once we focus on them, we actually realize that this child's behavior is not as bad as it becomes in my head. And that might be not the reality for everybody. We do know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised that our children will be a part of our test as well. So definitely things can be really difficult in some households, and we make dua for those people who are really struggling. And we also know that from the story of Noah alayhi salam, that our children will test us. And that is not a reflection definitely on us, that we're really bad parents or we don't really have the tools. But the reality is that most things can be managed in a different way. And I as a relationship therapist, I also often feel that what we need to do is a little shift in perspective, and a little shift in our attitude towards the other person can yield amazing results, inshallah ta'ala. So coming back to us kind of thinking about us mums or our fathers, or how are we going to look after ourselves. Another important thing is kind of, like I said, when we are stressed, we don't want to do anything for ourselves, but kind of taking up a little small hobby, 10-15 minutes for in a day for ourselves, which is easily done. I mean, if somebody tells me they don't have 10-15 minutes in a day for themselves, then I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy that, because we can make time for ourselves. So with that time, whether it's needlework, whether it's knitting, whether it's painting, whether it's gardening, whether it's anything that is just purely for myself. And the benefit with that is, I mean, those of us who can remember their mums or their grandmothers, nania, dadia, the way they used to for instance, just peel things, or when they're kind of sorting coriander, traditionally, they used to just sit, cross their legs and do that, and would take ages just doing that. And these days, if you think about how we're cooking in the kitchen, it's so anxiety provoking. It's always a rush. But the reality is that when we do something and we take our time, it really allows us to really calm ourselves down. So our nerves and our shoulders and kind of really, it just allows us to connect with one thing at a time. So a hobby is something which is extremely beneficial, inshallah ta'ala. And I guess the fact that we always look towards others who are better than us, and that attitude, in a way, we feel that if we want to be really productive, we look at these people who are really doing it in an amazing, perfect way, and we think secretly within ourselves, we feel really rubbish, and we think, well, you know, that person has 5 children, and, you know, they're doing so well, and what's wrong with me, and why can't I really be so productive or whatever. That attitude in itself is very problematic, because what that does is it generates a lot of shame and guilt, and it really pulls us down. Now, Islamically as well, we know that the Prophet ﷺ said that in the matters of dunya, we don't constantly compare with people who are better off from us in that sense. We look at people, we have to look at people who are worse off than us. Now, when we do that, that just allows us to put things in perspective. And putting things in perspective is very, very important. So I think that's a important reminder. And it's also important to kind of do this for ourselves, and again with our children, kind of reminding them as an activity, kind of thinking about what are the things that we can control and what are the things that we can't control. Because, for instance, this whole lockdown situation, obviously we're not in control when the schools are going to open or not open. So we don't know whether it's June, we don't know whether it's September. So constantly focusing on what we cannot control means that again will provoke a lot of anxiety. So it's important that we focus on what we can control and improve on that. And it's constantly kind of reframing. So going back to the cognitive dissonance, reframing our thinking, bringing our thinking back to here and now, and focusing on our present reality, and not kind of running into the future and kind of focusing on a lot of what if statements. We do know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells us that we're not meant to say, if only this has happened, that would have happened. No, that speculation is very problematic, and Islamically it's not a good state to be in, because then we kind of taking the focus away from the fact that even a leaf doesn't fall without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission and isn't. So the fact that whatever is happening, we don't know, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. So we have to ground ourselves, and if we ground ourselves, then we can definitely ground our children. So it's important that we're feeling anxious, we kind of really pause, and kind of really pull ourselves back. And especially if it's a situation with our children, we try and distance ourselves from the immediate situation and try and empathize, try and see things from their perspective. You know, why is he or she saying this? Why is he or she doing this? Then we think about different ways of approaching it. So if the default way is to shout and scream and kind of, you know, have an offload or have a lecture, what is a different way of dealing with that situation? And then we take a deep breath, we ground ourselves, we say Bismillah, and then we respond. So this allows us not to react, because reaction, obviously, oftentimes when we react, we know that that's propelled by the shaitan, and we often say things that we regret, and we are ashamed of. When we're angry, we say things that nobody's proud of. So it's important to do that. So with that, we just come to the conclusion, inshallah, by a reminder, which is a beautiful hadith which was mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, where the Prophet ﷺ said, amazing is the affair of the believer, where everything is good. So and whatever happens, we believe that if something good happens or happiness befalls, he is grateful, because he knows that that is good for him. And if something of harm befalls him, he is patient, because he knows that is good for him as well. So Jazakallah khair for listening. Shukriya.
Jazakallah khairan, mashallah. I've gained so much from that beautiful, beautiful talk, mashallah, this evening. And there was so much in it. And there's been a lot of questions that have come in as well. So as we said earlier on, if we don't get to answer them all, we will answer them and post them up for people as well, that they can get the answers. I'm trying to group a couple of them together. So I will just give you two questions in one. A teenager is always in her room. She spends most of her time in her room on her phone. I don't really know what she's doing. I feel frustrated. What can I do? And linked to that, we have about a teenager that suffers from insomnia. So maybe if you can answer those two together in your answers, Sister Abeda, please.
Okay, inshallah. So, Bismillah. So, answering the question about the teenager who's in a room a lot, I think that that's probably a worry that a lot of parents who have teenagers will have, because suddenly they will realize that the children are not as interested in coming downstairs and sharing any communal space. So they don't want to be in the kitchen, they don't want to be in the living room, they don't want to be in the dining room. There is a famous saying in Urdu. So those of you who are Urdu speakers, they might understand what I'm saying. So in Urdu we say "Pehle mail karo, phir kail karo." So what that means is that you build a rapport with the person that you want to engage with. So you see, the thing is that when children are not engaging with us at all, we have to get to the stage of the first stages, which kind of really break the ice. So getting to the place where the child would want to be around us, just so that they're not really worried about the same kind of a pattern. So they come to us and, mom's going to say something or dad's going to say something, and it's going to trigger something, and then we dispel. So I guess with the specific sister's question, I would encourage her to get to a place where she can maybe start sitting with her and kind of really just getting used to sharing the space and not worrying about too many things really, and gradually, inshallah ta'ala, engaging with her. If there is a persistent worry, like for instance with the other question, the insomnia thing, it's about understanding, are they staying up late at night and then sleeping during the day? Because even if the sleep is in a broken sleep, for instance, if they're accumulating 5 hours of sleep, that might be just good enough for their bodies to function. But then that sounds like it's a negative pattern that they've gotten into, that they're staying up late, like a lot of teenagers are doing these days, that they stay up late at night, throughout the night, and then they're sleeping during the day. So I suppose being anxious is problematic. So if we worry about that, and if we focus on something that's really big and catastrophic, then we will obviously give that anxiety to our children. But with the sleep thing, if that's persistent, and if you feel that they're not getting any sleep during the day as well, then I think it's important to go to the GP and make sure that they're checked and there is no underlying health issue. So I hope that does answer the question, Kathleen.
Jazakallah khairan, that's very good indeed. We have another question for the other side, the other age group indeed. My toddler is age 3 and I have an older child, age 11. There's a big gap between them. And in lockdown, I'm finding it difficult to cope, because when I do something with a younger child, the other one gets ignored. So it's a very hard time for me. Any advice?
I think that again is a reality for many households. So especially when we have that age gap, we just feel that children want different things. But I suppose the thing is that with the pressure that we feel that we have to constantly entertain our children and be there in our best of capacity, I think that pressure on parents is unrealistic. So for instance, if somebody is doing something with an 11-year-old, the younger one can be held, and because younger children, sometimes what they need more than a lot of connection, verbal connection, they are happy with being tactile. So for instance, if you're holding the child on your knee, whereas you kind of engaging with the older one verbally and kind of looking at them, that becomes quite an effective tool with the kind of engaging with both of them. Or another thing could be that when the younger one is having a nap, that could be a time first thing in the morning, you know, when one or the other is sleeping. That could be an opportunity to spend some one-to-one time with the older one, especially if you think about bedtimes, for instance. Sometimes if we have slightly different times, the younger one, the 3-year-old can sometimes sleep a bit early as compared to the 10-year-old. So I think it's just being slightly creative, but not feeling overwhelmed. So when we as parents feel overwhelmed, then our creativity goes out and we kind of go into a fight or flight mode, which means that we become a bit faffy and we feel like we can't do anything. So like I said, it's kind of connecting with the younger one physically and connecting with the older one kind of verbally and with our eye contact and practically doing things with the older one.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It is quite difficult, isn't it, for parents out there and trying to juggle and do everything indeed. We've got a question around parents themselves. So there's 2 questions here around that. One is, what is the difference between attachment, bonding, and connection? And are they all the same thing? And the other one is examples of personalization, black and white thinking. Is it overgeneralization or what?
Okay, so those are again both really good questions. So when we think about attachment, bonding, and connection, in psychology, obviously we look at different stages. So when we look at a newborn child, in terms of how we bond with our child initially, you know, whether that's latching on to the breast or kind of really connecting in those early days. That we see that as basic bonding. And then attachment is, in psychology, we obviously look at different styles of attachment. So we want our children to be securely attached to us. And attachment is a state where, you know, the child can be, if the child is securely attached to us, they're happy to connect with us, but then they feel secure within themselves because we've given them some inner resilience and confidence that they can move away from us and still be okay, rather than constantly looking towards coming back to us. So I think that's important. And connection is, I suppose, that kind of that connection, that rapport that we can have from a distance. So it's just kind of, you know, even if they sat across, you know, that by eye contact, that little smile, that thumbs up, whatever, you know, they feel that they are secure, and there is a kind of unspoken, unseen connection between a parent and child. So they're different things, but I think they're the same kind of they're the same pieces on the pearl necklace, really the same. They're part of the same jigsaw. So that's that. And the second question was, Kathleen, sorry. Oh, the second question. Yeah, it came to me. So it was about black and white thinking?
Yes, exactly. Black and white thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So black and white thinking is, so it's like you said this, so it must mean that. So it's very tunnel vision. So it's either this or that. So there's no gray area. So and that could apply for both. So sometimes parent can be very black and white. So if you're rude to me, that means that you have no if you've spoken to me abruptly, that means you have no respect for me. So, and that could be, that's a kind of a very overgeneralized way of looking at the situation. So that's overgeneralization. Like I said, black and white is all or nothing kind of. If it's not this way, then it must be nothing.
Mm-hmm. We've got a little bit of a sad one here indeed. How to deal with teenagers feeling nobody likes them. Lockdown is making them feel so lonely. How to encourage teenagers to get involved in activity groups that they don't want to.
Yeah, I think that's a tricky one, isn't it? So the thing is that, well, I can't see you, Kathleen.
Oh, can you? I'm here.
No.
See me?
Okay. Can you see me?
I can indeed, yes.
Okay, well, that's fine, as long as you can see me. I think that is a sad one. So the thing is that when we as parents feel really sad when our children are sad, and it's important again to ground ourselves and realize that when they're going through some difficulty, nothing is permanent. So in each child's life, there will be times when they will feel that they don't belong as much, or having issues at school, or their social kind of connection, or their popularity in their groups, or kind of their ability to engage is not as perfect or as good. So as parents, if we feel really sad and despondent, then that's going to spill over our children. So it's obviously very difficult, especially in this lockdown time when they're feeling really, really disconnected. So sometimes just holding on to a situation, then accepting that this is our reality for now. We can encourage them, we can prompt them, but we can't push them, because when we feel that it becomes a cycle, that they're saying no to something, and we kind of really kind of a broken record, keep saying, no, you need to do this, why aren't you doing this? Everybody else is doing this, or whatever, it becomes a very toxic cycle. So I think we have to, the first step is to move away from that kind of forcefully nudging them or pulling them out of a situation, because that never works. So kind of gradually kind of focusing on what language are we using to our children. So are we, because at this point we are the immediate resource, so what is our language? Because what sometimes a lot of damage is done by the way we have that negative interaction with our children. So at this point, the reality is that we work within whatever our resources are. So for a mother, for instance, who's worried about this, it's about kind of reconnecting with that child and finding opportunities and then putting them out there, because we're not going to force them at this point. And inshallah, come September, that's the time to revisit whether we want them to be part of a halaqah after school. You know, there's lots of opportunities for Muslim scouts, for instance, and finding new avenues, because if they are stuck in a negative friendship group, then it's about what can we provide from them out of school that's going to be helpful. And there are amazing things, you know, Kathleen, there are amazing things in the community that are happening. And sometimes we're so stuck in our own kind of a cycle that we don't really reach out and connect with the new schemes and new things that are happening in the community. So inshallah, with this child at this point, it's just important that the mother holds him in that sense. Emotionally holding our children is very important, and not looking at the worst possible scenario, against not being more anxious, because if we're anxious and if we're negative, we're going to spell that over. That is so contagious. So I hope that makes sense.
Wonderful. It does make perfect sense indeed. And it just brings us to the end of our time. Somebody's asking about the difference between psychology or psychotherapy and counselling. I think that's the only last question, but we can actually post that up on the group chat later on, or in the tips. We can let them know about that if we don't have time to answer that quickly.
I mean, I can quickly just say that the main difference between counseling and psychotherapy is that most counseling is short and sharp interventions. So when you come for counseling, it could be 6 sessions, it could be 12 sessions, it could be 20 sessions. Whereas with psychotherapy, you kind of really, it's a long contract. So you could be going to a psychotherapist for years on years, and you would be dealing with really little things that are to do with your personality, and kind of really homing into your past. And there are different ways of working in that setting. Whereas with counseling, they're different. So for instance, we deal with cognitive behavior therapy, which is a short and sharp intervention, or solution focused counseling. So, or even in couples therapy work, we kind of really have issues that we need to fix here and now. So the way some things are absolutely similar in terms of the therapeutic connection and all that, but obviously the duration is the main difference between the two.
Wonderful, well done. You did all of that in just going over a couple of minutes. MashaAllah, what a privilege it is always listening to you. And I'm going to take on some of those grounding exercises that you were talking about. I was actually, when we were talking about 5 things to see and going down to the smell, I was imagining all these smells of this evening's iftar, mashallah. So I must be getting hungry. I hope all our listeners enjoyed this evening, mashallah, and also are grateful, I'm sure, to you for giving up your time and giving us this wonderful talk and actually answering all their questions that came in. Jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much.
Wa iyaki. My pleasure. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, inshallah. We'd like to thank all our listeners and our viewers, whether you're on Zoom or whether you're on Facebook. We've had both connections in. We've responded to questions. If we missed any, please forgive me. It's from me, not been picking them up quick enough. But we will review them to make sure we've answered all our questions, inshallah, and answer them for you. And please join excuse me, please join the WhatsApp group and tell your friends about it. We're really trying to pass this information on to everybody. We have, as we said, the next session next week on resilience at 5 p.m. on Thursday, same day, Thursday the 14th, with Sister Maria. And then the following week, on the 21st, we have Brother Saeed that doing about happy families and looking at issues there and how we can promote and have happier families. Still probably being in lockdown, so we're trying to give this information to you in lockdown and reach you. And please pass on this information so we reach as many people as possible. We've set up these platforms to be able to engage with as many as possible over the next few weeks. Jazakallah khairan everybody for being with us. And we'd like to thank you so much. Do remember in your dua, do dua for each other, inshallah. And until next week, I say Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum.